where we are going to talk about EU and UK compliance for cosmetics. Throughout this webinar, feel free to write any questions in the Q&A box. We'll get to them at the end. And of course, if there's any extra questions, we'll be happy to answer them through email. We'll also send a follow-up link with the recording so you can refer back to this at any time that you'd like. So let's kick this off. If many of you who have been to our webinars know who I am, maybe not. Jacqueline Belomo. I've been in industry for over 15 years, closer to 20 years, focusing more on technical formulation, regulatory compliance, product development, and quality management. I've done everything you can think of in the R&D and regulatory world. I've worked at TPMs and brands and you name it. Love being in this industry. It is a great industry to be in, especially the community that we have and how all of us are just trying to educate each other and learn as much as possible with the ever-changing regulations that are going on throughout the world. We are so excited to talk about our EU-UK compliance today. As many of you know, Registrar acquired a PCR in December of 2024. So together they can provide you seamless end-to-end compliance for UK, EU, and US. PCR is a leading cosmetic regulatory toxicology and compliance company based in the United Kingdom and in Ireland. So look no further. We can help you with everything that you will need on your journey to be compliant. So our agenda today, we're going to go over the EU regulation for cosmetics specifically. We're going to talk about the 5 key steps to get your cosmetics on the EU and UK markets. And then we're going to discuss the compliant requirements in the regulation needed to get your products into the EU-UK markets. And we're going to focus around GMP, product safety and testing requirements, mandatory labeling, PIF, the EU-UK systems for product notifications, and understand the responsibilities of the responsible person in both the EU and the UK. As always, we're going to talk about consequences of non-compliance. It's really important for you to understand when you skip a step or miss a step or do something incorrectly, where that could kind of lead you, unfortunately, in consequence for non-compliance, and then again, how we can help you get into those markets. So most importantly, what is a cosmetic product and how is it regulated? So in the EU, a cosmetic product are substances or mixtures of substances intended to be placed in contact with external parts of the human body. So your skin, your hair, your nails, or with your teeth and the mucous membranes of the oral cavity. So this can be cleaning them, perfuming them, changing their appearance, protecting them, keeping them in good condition, or correcting body odor, for instance. Examples include makeup foundations, perfumes, hair colorants, lotions, shampoos, lip glosses, sunbathing products, and cleaning products, cleansing products. So how is it regulated? So we're going to talk about the European Union specifically, and the EU builds the regulatory framework for market access, international trade relations, and regulatory convergence. They aim to ensure the highest level of consumer safety while promoting the innovation and the competitiveness of the cosmetic sector. They work with cosmetic stakeholders at not only in the EU, but also the international level to exchange information and ensure the smoother implementation of EU requirements in the cosmetic sector. And one of the most important things, I want to stress today is, especially a lot of us who are feeling every time that we feel we're up and we're compliant and we're following everything that the EU has put into place, another regulation comes into play, a lot of thought goes behind when they put in new regulations. And again, the most important piece of it is having the highest level of consumer safety. They're not trying to, stop innovation. They're not trying to, make it so that only the big brands can compete because they have the teams to review the regulatory compliance. They're really looking out for the best method forward into protecting the consumer and also allowing the cosmetic sector to grow and for brands to grow in the EU and the UK. So the primary EU and UK regulation for cosmetic products is regulation number 1223, 2009. It went into force in July 11th, 2013. The regulation was signed on November 30th, 2009. So very important to know that the EU takes timelines very seriously. They understand what an undertaking it is to change a regulation or update a regulation. So you'll see through this presentation, we talk a lot about, products that are existing in the timelines versus new products. But very important to understand that they know how difficult this is to change the regulatory framework of your product to have it become compliant with new regulations. The regulation establishes a comprehensive framework to ensure that all cosmetic products marketed in the EU are safe for human health. Cosmetic sellers must be in compliance with these standards in order to sell their products in the EU. And again, it harmonizes the rules in the community to achieve an internal market for the cosmetic products. With these regulations, it imposes a clear and detailed rule, which not to give room for diverging transposition by member states, right? So everyone in the EU, whether you're in Spain or whether you're in Italy, this regulation is clear and detailed, and that there isn't confusion among all the member states in the EU of how to follow this. It also ensures that legal requirements are implemented at the same time throughout the European Union. That is probably the most important sentence I'll say all day. A lot of us who are, selling cosmetics in the US, we're seeing this at a state level, right? Every individual state coming out with different regulations around cosmetics at different times and different types of regulations. And it could be very overwhelming. It could be very, detrimental to brands trying to break into the market to have so many differing requirements per state versus per the entire country. And I think it's really great that the European Union has set these legal requirements so that they can be implemented at the same time throughout the European Union. We're hopefully seeing this happen with Mokra in the coming years. And again, Mokra is still, in my opinion, brand new and a little bit on its path of trying to establish strict guidelines and rules for cosmetics sold in the United States. And we will get there one day. 100%, I believe in it. But it's very important that you understand that these waves of legal requirements are all implemented at the same time. Much easier to navigate in the EU, what's required and what's not. And then most importantly, and I always put this in here first, is what you really need before your launch, and when you're talking about where to make your product, how to make your product. And I always say, make sure wherever you're making your product is up to the EU GMP standard. And again, ISO 22716 is an international standard used for GMP guidance in the EU and the UK for production, control, storage, and shipment of cosmetic products. It covers quality aspects of the product, but does not, doesn't cover the safety aspects. But it's very, very important to understand that products must be GMP compliant prior to going into market. And your responsible person in the EU will make sure that your manufacturing facility is GMP compliant. ISO audits, they have to be done every 3 years with surveillance audits every year. But this is really kind of, your first step into understanding, even before what we're all going to get into with the safety and labeling and everything that goes along with the regulation, is that where you are making your product is GMP compliant. We are still waiting for FDA to release their GMP requirements, but even the FDA for guidance for industry follows the ISO standard very closely, with some modifications, obviously, that they have made over the last few years. But knowing where you're making your product is essential. And it will be the first question that you get asked about where you make it, are they GMP compliant, and where's their certification and where's their audit. Okay, so going into the cosmetic product itself, right, and the process. And again, anyone who has dealt with EU, UK registration, it is not for the faint of heart. There is a lot of documents, there is a lot of requests, and everything has to be collected and reviewed, because all of these documents help create these 5 key steps of complying with the EU regulation, right? And first, you obviously need to collect your raw material SDSs, your TDSs, your compositional breakdowns, any impurities, and all of those raw material documents get grouped together and evaluated, along with your stability compatibility reports, your micro reports, your QQs, your inky breakdowns, and all of this gets combined, right? Warnings, expiration dates, use instructions, dose, all of this gets combined, and the testing documents with it to create a cosmetic product safety report, also known as a CPSR, right? So a toxicologist is looking at all of these documentations together from your raw materials, right? And understanding each raw material's toxicity and toxicological report individually, and then again, all of those ingredients used together, and how they're used. And I say this often, right? If you've heard our webinars before, but all your ingredients and together, and the recommended use and where it's used is really crucial to understanding the overall safety of your product, right? I always use mascaras as a really great example, right? So mascara that's near your eye, right? Your mucous membrane, right? The chances of something happening with a mucous membrane is a lot higher risk, right, than versus putting on a body wash that you're in the shower putting on and rinsing off, right? So all of those considerations go into the overall evaluation of the safety of the product. And our toxicologists are so skilled at PCR. They have extensive knowledge in each product form and each product function, as well as the ingredients that they're evaluating to understand the overall safety of the product. And it's really important that the CPSR, both parts A and part B, are done correctly, because this, in hindsight, is how safe your product is going to be on the market. It also helps establish the durability of your product, how long this product is durable in the hands of a consumer or on a shelf. So very important to understand that. The next part is labels. Also a huge part of why there's a lot of non-compliance with labels, and it by no means of anyone, but it being a very complicated piece when you have a global label. So if you're selling in the US and Canada, EU, UK, right, understanding the warnings you need to have, understanding the font sizing, understanding net contents, net weight, understanding where warnings need to go, understanding each piece of this can be very complicated. I was actually just dealing recently with a label that was going internationally into EU and into Canada and to the UK, and having all of those functions, right, translated onto the label. And it's very complicated to fit all of this. It's complicated to make sure that you have everything in the right size and where you're supposed to have it, right? Understanding the PDP, understanding where the inky goes. So very, very hard to do if it's not your expertise. But one of the biggest ones that is always out of non-compliance are labels, and that is always the first thing you see at port of entry, right? They are looking at labels. They are evaluating what type of product is coming into the EU and the UK. Product information file, also known as a PIF. This is where all combined, the testing, raw material documents, the CPSR, the stability data, everything is in this product information file. And this is what the responsible person needs to hold on to in case a local authority does ask for information on your cosmetic product. The responsible person that is designated in the EU and the UK need to have this file on hand and be able to readily give it over to those local authorities. And that's really key here, right? Having all of those testing documents and all of the raw material documents. Any statements, right? Like no animal testing or any claims you're making, right? Having that all readily available. It's a huge file. It's a lot to take on. Not knowing the essentials of what's in the PIF could really lead you down to a potential issue for non-compliance and consequences of that, which we'll get into a little bit later. Next is the notifications. EU and UK both have different notification systems, so you'll have to notify in both the EU and the UK. And then lastly, the responsible person. This is someone who is designated in the EU, in the UK, who is responsible for your product. And I cannot tell you how important it is to partner with a good, responsible person. And this is mainly because when there is an issue, like an adverse event, or if there is an issue with a product quality, right, that could lead to a safety concern, your responsible person is at the forefront of having the right system and right responses ready to go in order to properly address the safety concern or adverse event that occurred and properly documented so that you are in compliance with the EU and UK regulations. They are also the ones who help keep you up to date with all of the required regulations and requirements as well. Especially with, for instance, the EU allergen, extended allergens that are coming out, right? The responsible persons were already 2 years ago asking for that extended allergen list, right? Going through this process of you need to add this in, this is now required on the label. And then also helping you go through, right, your existing products and what needs to get updated or get changed since suppliers have been updating all of their documentation and all of their extended allergens as well. And I have been seeing a lot, brands more recently struggle with this part, whether or not, their responsible person is going that extra mile and helping them get through it or not. But very, very important that the responsible person is continuously helping you make sure your products are up to date and complying with the regulations that are changing. So we're going to go individually into each one. Again, I kind of talked in a lot of detail in the last slide, but the first step is the Consumer Product Safety Report creation, also known as a CPSR, and it's an independent evaluation report on the assessment of the overall safety of the cosmetic product. A safety assessment that is legal is a legal requirement for all products sold in the UK and the EU under the Cosmetic Product Regulation. This must be in place prior to going to market, and it determines that the products are safe under reasonable, foreseeable conditions, much like I said, right? So you have a mascara, here are the ingredients, use once a day, near the eye area, right? Having the proper warnings if needed, and it must be completed by a qualified safety assessor with credentials available within the final report. So many might not know this, but within the CPSR, that safety assessor also attaches their resume, their prior experience, and what makes them qualified in order to fulfill the CPSR parts A and B correctly. And that's really key here. There's a lot of misunderstanding that, software can do this for you and that the CPSR can be generated by an internal team, and that is not the case. You need to have a qualified safety assessor. If you do have one on staff, great for you, but most people do not keep the toxicologists and safety assessors on staff. So it could be a longer type of process if you do not do this prior to your launch, and if you don't have a good team of safety assessors and toxicologists working for you. Again, we want to talk about parts A and part B, and this is why it's so complicated, right? It's not as easy as one page. I've seen some CPSRs be upwards of 50 and 60 pages, right? And part A really focuses on the cosmetic product safety information. So this section gathers and organizes all the available data on the products, such as the toxicological profile of ingredients, the formulation, the testing, exposure information. And it consists of analysis of all the data from the PIF to ensure the product safety. And this can be, the physical chemical characteristics of the ingredients of the product, the stability of the product, and it also could be involved with the, as I mentioned, the micro testing and even additional testing that you might do on the products, such as RIPT or SIU testing. All of that can be analyzed inside the cosmetic product safety information. Part B is the cosmetic product safety assessment. This section contains the conclusion of the product safety based on the analysis conducted in Part A. So I think Part A is kind of like the research part and showing you all of the pieces of it. And then Part B is the overall assessment of after analyzing all of those individual pieces of information and bringing it all together. This is the final safety assessment report, and this is where they'll include any warnings, usage instructions, or other limitations that could be considered when marketing the product. A lot of cases we'll see, especially if you're talking about products that potentially can get into the eye, potentially, be ingested, things of that nature. You'll definitely see more of those warnings or limitations in the usage. And this assessment comes from those individual pieces all together. Label compliance. So Article 19 outlines the mandatory label requirements for cosmetic products sold in the EU and the UK. A lot of what I stress with the labels is because I feel labels is where everybody always gets a little hung up, and there's always rushing in artwork. I don't know if everyone feels me on that one, but I definitely feel there's always a timeline, and the artwork timeline is always late, and everyone's always rushing. So that's where most of the mistakes could really come and be the part where you might not be able to enter the EU or the UK. So most importantly, the responsible person. So name and address of the responsible person who ensures the product's compliance has to be on the label. And your RP will tell you how to present that information on the label correctly. Precautions for use. So required warnings, special precautions. We see this a lot if you're doing any SPFs or if you're doing any AHAs or anything retinol, right? Where there has to be an additional warning when using that product because of the safety assessments that have been done and the evaluations that have been done on prior products to know which products need to have particular warnings or precautions. Net weight, you have to state the product's weight or volume at the time of packaging, and this is displayed on the principal display panel, and it needs to be the correct units of measure as well. There's a lot of fluid, ounces, milliliters, grams, so very, very important to understand your type of product and how the net weight needs to be correctly displayed in the right measurement. Batch number, extremely important. And normally this is done at the time of filling the product in its final packaging. And that's how you are able to reference that bulk and reference that finished good so that you can identify if there is an issue with an adverse event or a quality issue that can lead to a safety concern. You can track down that bulk, track down that finished good. Ingredient list, descending order by weight, colors appropriately identified, and then fragrance listed according to the regulation. I have never seen more confusion in fragrance in my life than I have in the last, I would say, 6 months. Just updated fragrance reports, updated allergens, percentages, what needs to be listed, do we list it anyway? So very important that if you are not familiar with this type of work, or if you're having struggles with this, that you come and especially to Registrar and PCR to help get direction with the label compliance. Date of minimum durability. So specific to EU, if your product has a shelf life that is under 30 months, then you need to display an expiration date. And again, your shelf life is determined from your stability compatibility reports, right? And how that product performs in accelerated conditions. And anything under 30 months requires that expiration date. And again, for longer shelf lives, you also need to have a PAO, so period after opening. So even if you don't need the expiration date because your product is over 30 months, you still need to display that PAO. If you have an expiration date, you can use the hourglass symbol and display it in month and year. And that's, the best practices that we've seen. Product function, very important. This function of the product must be indicated unless it's clear from the presentation. And again, when you're selling throughout the EU, the product function is one of the key pieces on the label that needs to be translated on local languages as well. So if you're in Italy, if you're in Spain, if you are in Germany, right, the function has to be translated into that local language, as well as any warnings as well. Sorry, I forgot to mention that, but the warnings and the functions are the huge ones that have to get translated in those local languages. And then directions of use, like how to apply the product, amount of use, and frequency of application. Now, everyone's probably wondering, how do we fit this all in a label and also be compliant? And again, this is why if you're not familiar with the label compliance, definitely go to the experts to help you through this process. PIF creation. This is probably one of the more, difficult tasks, I would say, for regulatory specialists and everyone who works in regulatory. I think anytime that we get formula approval for anything, we rush to say, all right, please send me all the documents. And again, the product information file, also known as a PIF, is a file of all the documents related to the product that the company has to retain, and it has to be easily accessible in a location. I can't tell you how many SDSs and C of A's and TDSs I have collected over my lifetime, but the PIF has to be fully compliant with the provisions set out in the regulation. So you'll see on the side, right, the product description, the formula IL, the MSDS, TDSs, the packaging information, GMP, animal test statement. This is all a part of the PIF. And the PIF should be kept for a period of 10 years following the date of when the last batch of the cosmetic product was placed on the market. That is a very long time to keep all of these documents. And if you think about how many products you launch a year and all the reforms and updates, it is a lot to take on. The responsible person has to make the PIF, right? So they have to be able to have all these documents. And again, they could be accessible either in electronic or they can have hard copies. They have to be available at one single address within the EU, a location, and also UK, location of and access to the PIF should also be on the label, so meaning the responsible person's address, and then available in the language which can be easily understood by the competent authorities of that member state. So again, how I mentioned German or Italy or Spain, understanding how easily these have to be accessible for those local markets as well, and easily understood for those local authorities. Next up is the cosmetic notifications. And again, they are market specific. So in the EU, you have the Cosmetic Product Notification Portal, also known as the CPNP. And again, it's a submittal of the formulation and labeling into the EU portal, and it must be completed prior to going to market. And you'll see that with a lot of, especially like retailers or anyone selling into the EU and the UK, you want to have this available, especially if it's asked at port of entry. But most retailers, especially in the EU, request this information before you're even shipping your cosmetic products. So very, very important. It has to be done prior. EU notifications are based on formulation. So products may be grouped by formula for submission into each portal, meaning same product, different colors can be grouped together, same product, different size may be grouped together. So very important how that works. It can get a little complicated for sure, especially if you have, eyeshadows and you have palettes that, and there's 7 different bases or 8 different bases, right? And how to group those properly together. It could be very complicated, but that is why you have your responsible person who is experienced on how these notifications work, working with you to understand how to properly notify into the EU. And then again, how do you manage those notifications? You have to notify the local authority. If you are no longer selling products into the EU, you have to remove the notifications that are also no longer on market. And luckily, you do not need to renew the notifications every year, but you do need to update. If you make any changes to the formula, any changes to the artwork, you have to update the existing notifications. So really, really important to understand specifically for the EU, how this notification system works and what the notification system requires of the responsible person. So as a brand, right, working with a responsible person in the EU, UK, and you have a formula change, you have a reform, right, you need to notify your responsible person so they can take the proper steps in updating the notification. For the UK, is the Cosmetic Product Notification Portal is the SCPN. And again, this is a UK portal, so submit cosmetic product notifications, and it must be completed prior to going to market. UK notifications are based on artwork. Example, gift sets must have their own notification. But again, products may be grouped for by formula for submission into each portal. And same follows, you have to notify the local authority. You have to take older products off. Remove the notification if they're no longer on the market, and you do not need to renew. If there is an update to the formula or the artwork, you need to have a new notification. You cannot update the existing notification. So that is a really key part here in understanding the EU and the UK and how they separately work in their portals and the type of requirements that you will need in order to submit new notifications, and also how to handle your existing notifications. I really love talking about the EU UK regulations. You might be able to tell. It's very, I think they have figured out a really smart and easy way. And when I say easy, everyone's probably saying this doesn't seem easy at all, to handle it when you have a great responsible person. And I can't stress enough, the PCR team is phenomenal. They are just so experienced and talented in understanding what is needed, how to do it quickly. They have it down to a science. So, and again, a separate RP is required for both the UK and the EU. And PCR has locations in both EU and UK to meet that requirement. It has to be an established entity legally responsible for ensuring that a cosmetic product complies with cosmetic regulations. And this could be the manufacturer, which is the brand owner. So if you have a location there, you could be your own responsible person. But again, if you do not, you can designate an authorized representative, meaning like a PCR, to be your responsible person. And again, the authorized representative has their name and address on the product label. And that's a huge, huge piece of making sure you pick the right responsible person, because labels are not fun to update. They're not easy to update, and they're not cheap to update. So very important to understand picking the right responsible person. Again, the responsible person is in charge of the technical documentations, labels, and instruction of use, the manufacturer details. They're the ones that have the conversations with local authorities. They also provide market surveillance, which is really, really key here into understanding too how the EU and the UK go through new regulations and understanding product safety as well, because when a product's on market, right, for 10 years and there wasn't one adverse event, right, there wasn't one product issue, right, you can demonstrate the product's safety through that market surveillance and understanding the use of it and the ingredients in there and developing its own kind of safety assessment. They also are responsible for notifying the manufacturer if they suspect a product is dangerous or potentially could cause a safety concern. And this is really key. We've been seeing this so often in so many different countries, right? We just saw a concern in Australia about SPFs. We saw the concern in the US about, the benzene. And this is really how we navigate, a lot of these countries help navigate when there is product risk or concern, is the responsible person has an oversight and a view into the product safety like no one else does. And again, I truthfully believe partnering with the right responsible person makes this process so much easier and also helps you establish the safety assessments and requirements that you have for your products as well. I have worked with a lot of brands in my life, and having the right safety assessor and the right responsible person to help give you oversight about your product and your product safety at the beginning is really key. And this comes into play too when you have the riskier cosmetic products, when you have aerosols, when you have perfumes, when you have eye products, right? The safety of that and designating the right safety protocols to put into place, or the right warnings or potential issues you could arise. That all comes from this evaluation and comes from the responsible person working with you and working with the product to fully understand it, right? And how it's going to be used and react right in the consumer's hands. One huge thing, and I think this is probably not everyone's favorite subject, but very important to know, that consequences of non-compliance can be very costly. There are tons of articles, I don't need to call out any names, but there's tons of articles out there right now of brands having to deal with non-compliance in the EU and the UK, specifically, simple things of not having their PIF readily available, and not having a completed PIF. This could be a huge fine. I saw one just recently that was upwards of $300,000 for not having a compliant PIF. And the local authorities are able to do this. Governing body is country specific, right? So the local authority is able to ask for this information. It's able to go through all of the documentation. And if you fail to have a valid safety assessment, a compliant label, notification of your product, and then maintaining a product file, they're able to take action. Detention is probably the least of your worries, right? But they can detain your product. As you can see in a lot of those news articles, it could be damage to the brand and their reputation, because it becomes very public about the non-compliance. Products can be put on hold with customs. So if you don't have the proper label, you don't have the proper documentation, you don't have your notifications, they can hold your products. Fines, as I just mentioned before, the one I just saw recently was upwards of the $300,000 mark, and their products are in being recalled, right? So that mandatory recall. And then you could also be required to relabel at the port of entry, which is also very, very costly. And I have been seeing more and more push to become compliant with EU, UK regulations, and the local authorities taking more of a stance with the cosmetic products. Because as everyone knows, I mean, as we're sitting here on this webinar, 15 products probably just launched in Sephora. It is an ever booming industry, and there are so many cosmetic products out there, and everyone is moving so fast to be the first in market, right? Failure to be compliant when you're launching in the EU and UK, and whether you've already been there or whether you're just going there now, can be very costly if you do not do it correctly. And I cannot stress that enough. So are you still feeling overwhelmed and navigating through EU, UK regulatory requirements? I cannot speak more highly again of the PCR team and Registrar. Over 30,000 clients, worldwide offices. So no matter where you are in the world, we have someone sitting right in your local area. There has been over 5,000 CPSRs created, over 1,000 products notified, and over 20 years of service, and with PCR combined, over 40 years of service. Amazing toxicologists on staff, certified, and a great team to help you walk through any questions that you have. Again, their key services are creating the essential compliance package, right? So creating the cosmetic product safety report, artwork reviews, the PIF creation, and also notifications. And again, it's really key here to understand all of the intricate questions that they're going to come back and ask. I always get shocked when they come back and they're like, oh, we need an IFRA statement for this, and or an allergen statement for this. And it's like, but it's not a fragrance, but it could be, but it potentially has those allergens, right? And we see this a lot with essential oils or natural type of oils and ingredients. So they have just the ability to look at your formulation and know exactly what to ask. They are really understanding of the product specifications and the type of products, the packaging that goes into it. There is nothing that they miss. In terms of artwork review as well, you know, they're making sure your artwork is compliant with articles 19 and 20, and making sure all the claims and logos have the appropriate substantiation and certification. I cannot tell you how many times you know, somebody submits labels and has a bunny and they're trying to say they're Leaping Bunny, but it's not the Leaping Bunny, and things of that nature, or making claims that potentially could lead them down a troubled path, right, with consumers or with local authorities, right? Like over claiming a product as something like takes 20 years off your face, right? Things of that nature. They're very much apted to recognize, call out, and make sure that you are taking the right steps into having a compliant label as well. Again, if you already have a responsible person, and maybe you're not you're not happy or something, just that, you know, you don't feel like you're getting this in-depth type of look and research that I've explained today, between the safety assessments with the CPSRs, Part A and Part B, the qualifications that go into the safety assessor, or if you feel that, you know, I've never had to hand over a documentation or SDSs or TDSs or anything in depth like I've talked today, our team is really equipped in taking your existing PIFs, your existing information, and doing a gap analysis and understanding what information is missing, and taking on that responsibility to help you through this process. And again, more often, I want to say in the last 3 years, there are tons of people who are acting as responsible persons in the EU and UK markets because it is a requirement, right? But when you don't have the team behind to properly assess the product safety, go through the right documentation, the PCR team will review all the documentation and ensure that it's valid. You know, some things you don't even realize, right? MSDSs need to be within the last 5 years. C of A's need to be within the last year, right? And that's really, really key into understanding how much goes into understanding the documentation that you need, needs to get updated. And again, once they do that gap analysis, get that additional documentation, they will actually do the notification for you again under a new RP, under the new RP. So even if you feel, you know, that you have an RP and, you know, this seems like a lot of work to move to a new RP, it's really not, because the team does such a great job of making sure you're compliant. One of the biggest things I get whenever I talk about the EU and the UK regulations, and I go through all the documentation that's needed, the assessments that go into it, the toxicological assessments, the safety assessments, durability, everyone's like, I I did not know it was that many documents. I sell in the EU, I sell in the UK. So if anything I said today sounds like I have not done that, definitely reach out, because it's really important to have all of this documentation and information compiled together, because if you do get asked, or your responsible person gets asked for their PIF and for all this information, and it is not in order, that leads to that costly non-compliance slide that we saw before, that could potentially lead you down a very scary road of having to do a recall or getting fined. And again, PCR is also offers those responsible person services, and they represent you in both the EU and the UK. They do annual reviews. They also handle undesirable effects and serious undesirable effects evaluation and reporting, and they also have regulatory support as well. One other key thing, I'm not sure if everyone knows as well, but Registrar and PCR are also part of Cosmetry, which is a software specifically designed for cosmetic products, that has the EU and UK regulations built into the software to do proper screening and proper evaluation of your ingredients, right, prior to or during your product development process and during your R&D formulation. It also helps house all of your documentations as well, so your C of A's, SCS's, MSDS's. So together, the software, Cosmetry, Registrar, and PCR really make the flow of all the information basically seamless. And it helps also organize on both fronts of your internal teams that maybe are using SharePoint, maybe are using clouds, Google Clouds, helps keep it in a secured location and easily accessible. As I mentioned, you have to make sure you have the right systems in place, right people in place to be able to act accordingly if a local authority asks for an inspection. And trust me, we will be seeing lots of inspections coming up, especially in the EU and the UK in the coming years. And that is mostly because of all of the regulations that are going to be coming in effect within the next year around microplastics. There's a French law for PFASs, the allergens, IFRA. So there's a lot of change that's happening, and they want to make sure that everyone is complying with those changes. So if you have not been addressed by your current RP of these changes, I highly recommend reaching out to us, and we can kind of walk you through how this review gap analysis can go. Or if you're just starting off, eventually wanting to sell in the EU and the UK, we are a great place to find to find brands just launching and getting you on the right path from the start. And again, handling all of this that you see here is what this team does, and they are the experts in doing so. Hopefully you guys have been dropping questions into the chat, and I've left some time because I know this is a huge topic for a lot of people. Oh, great. I see a lot of questions. And again, if we don't get through all of the questions in the next 12 minutes or so, please reach out to John. He is phenomenal. He will get you to the right person to answer any of your questions, and whether it be EU, UK specific, or involved with US, or if you're interested in our Cosmetry software, please reach out to him. He will get you to the right person and get your questions answered. But let's answer some of your questions today. And again, the recording is going to be sent out after the webinar, and you're happy to listen to my voice for another hour again. But if you have more specific questions about your products and things, I highly recommend emailing John directly. Okay, so let's get to questions. We have the first question. How does the Inky breakdown work? Do you prepare it for each ingredient based on the supplier's composition sheet? And if it's a big blend, how detailed is this breakdown and report? Really great question. So one of the requirements is getting a QQ, so a qualitative, quantitative breakdown of the formulation, which is basically each raw material, right? So each raw material will have a trade name, and inside that raw material, the compositional breakdown of each ingredient, meaning the percentage of each ingredient in that raw material. So say, for instance, you have a blend of castor oil, jojoba oil, and coconut oil, right? And it's you know, a 30, 40, 30 blend, right? Go to say. And the compositional sheet will come directly from the supplier. And how generally most, I will say, suppliers have been pretty good about their comp breakdowns. They're very truthful in the percentages because, you know, again, if you've ever tried to remake a raw material, it's pretty difficult. You know, there's a lot of proprietary information that hides behind those percentages, right, of manufacturing procedures and processing and et cetera. So most likely they'll give you the straight compositional breakdown. Other companies, not so much so. They might give you ranges, right? And again, if it's a big blend, each of those detailed percentages need to be listed for each individual ingredient inside that raw material. From there, each individual percentage is then taken from the percentage of the raw material used in the formulation. And that is how that percentage is determined in terms of weight. And then again, when you have each individual ingredient, and then everything above 1% has to be in descending order of weight. Anything below 1% can be arranged however you see fit. And then colorants may be at the end, whether they be, you know, issued as the colorants for individual shades, or if you have a base and all of your shades, like for a foundation, for example, all of your foundations have the same base, all the same colorants, and that is where you can have a universal IL, and you can even do the may contain as well. So hopefully that answered your question. I love inky questions. I do a lot of inkies during my day. You know, I more than I would like to admit, I do. But definitely really important if you're not understanding how the ingredient breakdowns work, our team can definitely help you. Where it gets really complicated, and this is where this is where the experts come in, right? Is if you're provided a compositional breakdown statement and they give you ranges, right? So you say you have 10 ingredients in a raw material and they give you ranges for all of that, right? So our team helps make sure that you're taking those ranges into consideration and going even further, right? So you're going to have a range, do the calculation for the range. Once you get that calculation, do the calculation for the raw material. So definitely more complicated than it sounds. But our team is very great experts of this. And definitely, if you're having trouble, we're here to help. Can you briefly explain the difference between OTC drugs in the US and cosmetics in the EU, UK? Great question. I get this a lot. It's makes maybe a little to no sense to a lot of us why an SPF in the US is deemed an OTC cosmetic, and in SPF in EU, UK is considered a cosmetic. Does not require drug fact labeling, does not require the active ingredient to be displayed out, does not require the same type of testing and information as it does in the US. And for that reason, we have definitely had to do artwork and label reviews specifically for anyone who has an SPF in the US and wants to move it into the EU and the UK. There's also regulations around the type of testing that you need to have for an SPF going in the EU and UK, right? So we have the FDA standard, but there's also the ISO standard. To add more layers to the complexity, there's also a requirement of the SPF that you're allowed to claim, right? And the recommendation that comes from those claims. If you go through the recommendations, there is no SPF 40, right, under their recommendation in the EU and UK. So if you have an SPF 40 in the US, most likely you are going to have to claim SPF 30 in the EU and the UK. So SPF is my favorite example of this because SPF should be, you know, accessible and easy for everyone to have. but definitely still follows a very rigid type of regulation. They're going to ask for your SPF efficacy testing. They're going to ask for all of your UVA, UVB testing, wavelength testing, right? That doesn't just go away. But the process of getting the product into the EU and the UK is slightly easier. This also goes for any acne products as well. In the US, acne products, right, are OTC drugs, cosmetics. And in the EU, UK, you can't say acne, but you can say blemish, right? And again, leading you to have 2 different labels on your product. And more specifically, getting more complicated about what you need to have on your product in terms of warnings, in terms of ingredient listing, right? Because now the active does not go in its own place with a percentage, right? It goes back into the formulation. And, you know, it can get very complicated very fast. So love that question. I also love that EU and UK do SPF and blemish products as cosmetics, because I do believe they, you know, that OTC cosmetic range, some, you know, the OTCs in the US are almost treated exactly like pharmaceutical company, a pharmaceutical drug, right? Where pharmaceutical companies have the ability to, and the funds, right, to do the complex testing and GMP requirements and validations and cleaning validations and filling validations that all go through this process when you're selling an OTC in the US. Next question from some of our international clients ask for a PAO recommendation, even though the shelf life is not 30 months or more. I don't think it makes much sense to issue a PAO if the shelf life is less than 30 months, as it basically contradicts itself. Can you comment on this? Yes. I actually just had a very intense conversation with a contract manufacturer where the shelf life of the product was 24 months. And under accelerated stability, right? So under accelerated stability, 24 months was the shelf life. And they wanted to put a period after opening. And you are 100% right. It contradicts itself, right? Because the shelf life determines when it is expired and should no longer be used. So if you put a expiration date and also a PAO, how does the consumer evaluate that I opened it, but it expires in 2 months, but the PAO says that I have 12 months to use it? So it is never recommended to put a PAO on a label if you have an expiration date. That expiration date leads the charge of when that product is good to use. The PAO would just cause further confusion about the overall durability of the product and potentially could lead to safety issues. So if that's the conversation, you know, make sure you bring up that safety part, right? Because confusion of the PAO, and let's be honest, expiration dates are sometimes lasered on the carton, the side of the tube, and maybe not as visible as a PAO. So adding a PAO, I think, actually confuses the consumer and potentially could lead them into having the product longer than they should, and could lead to safety concerns, especially if it's an eye product. I can't stress that enough. But yes, lead with expiration, leave PAO off. The only time that I have seen a PAO put on a product that had an expiration date is if they were launching ahead of when they'd have full accelerated stability completed, and eventually we're taking the expiration date off, say within a month of finishing the accelerated stability. That is the only time I've ever seen that. And even then, I feel like that is the highest of risk, and I would not recommend that by any means at all. Couple of questions. Oh, so many questions, guys, and I'm so sorry. We are on a minute left. So please, I see so many questions. I want you to please email John after and ask all your questions. I really highly recommend working with our team for EU, UK. There are so many things that we didn't even discuss today. and I see a lot of questions about cost. So John can answer all of these for you, get you to the right person. It's definitely, you know, one of my favorite teams to work with, because I really do enjoy EU, UK compliancy. But thank you all for joining. And again, please reach out with all of your questions. We'll be more than happy to answer.